any changes when it comes to destination preferences, or when we do have such disruptions? Is this a pattern that you tend to observe?
And political instability does affect our industry greatly, and you do see shifts in terms of demand. So, for example, at the IMEX Frankfurt, we used to have a lot of Russian buyers who came to IMEX Frankfurt and were placing significant business into Europe. Now those buyers are placing that business into Asia, India, the Middle East. None of these shifts are permanent.
So just right there is some of the conversations that we have been having over the last 2 weeks with different leaders, and those conversations are continuing. Just trying to converse around what are the moments of crisis that we are seeing in our industry, whether it's in travel, hospitality, MICE, business events. Just the challenges in the market. That is the essence of the conversations that have been happening on our podcast series, Leadership in Crisis. And there we are. We have Mulemo back, facing her own set of crises this afternoon. Welcome. And just when I said welcome, she was gone. So perhaps for you who is on the call today, and I know that we are spread across, different places in the continent. Some of us are in MICE, in business events. I see Sylvia joining us from Ohio. We are facing a moment of crisis that is fast evolving. And this is not the first time that our industry has suffered shocks. Perhaps in the chat, you begin to tell us what are some of the things that you're noticing where you are, and how are you navigating crisis, even as we begin this conversation.
Okay, there we go. If this platform throws me off one more time, I will have a new name for it. But anyway, as we get through this afternoon, allow me to just recognize the partners. And as you've seen, we did have even IMEX came on. Barry, our all-weather partner, has been with us on a number of activities already. I think a very big thank you to everybody that has been holding our hands, has been a partner with us, and also has even just the validation that we're receiving from industry. As Kezi said, this is not the first time that our industry has faced shocks, but it is only when the shocks come that we actually get to realize what our value, our significance. So when nothing is when it's business as usual, our industry is really back office, nobody's paying attention. It is when we need to manage, when we need to, when we are given a zero stat line, or when the stop line is drawn. That is when we kind of just have an appreciation of the value and the role that our industry plays, which is quite unfortunate, because by now we should have a way in which we're considered as priority when conversations are being had. So as we get through the year, we're going to be feeling the effects of the geopolitical tensions, especially in the Middle East. We're going to be feeling those for years to come. And so when we...
Susan, if you can mute.
Okay. Okay, so this session is meant to be interactive. We are going to have a chat between ourselves, but the idea is that we learn from each other, and that is why it's a lunch and learn. So you come on the call and be a part of the conversation. We're here to lead the conversation, but we don't know the experiences in the different destinations, and we do hope that you can feel a part of the process. So please mark your calendars for every last Wednesday of the month. If something comes up and we have conversations, we will obviously share those through the podcast. But this lunch and learn is designed to be had at the end of every Wednesday. So I will allow Kezi to just kind of walk us through. By the way, let me just share this about Kezi, and anybody that has worked with her will say this. She won't forgive me. She didn't even know I was going to throw this in. But Kezi is the most calm human being. Like her calmness is, it's not even infectious. It's worrying because you could be in a crisis. The walls are falling and she's literally very calm and walking you through. So that is a superpower that she possesses. And that superpower came very handy because on the 28th, if I'm not mistaken, about the 20, I think the 1st of March was really like D-Day, but I think you went straight from Meetings Africa to an incentive group that you were managing in the Far East. You tell us a bit more about that. But you get to this event and the world is crashing. So what was supposed to have been a very beautiful event, I remember you sent me a picture of saying, I was literally in this airport a few hours ago and now it's chaotic. So maybe if you were an ordinary human being, walk us through the crisis that was the 1st of March and everything else until you got back home. Just tell us the story.
Well, I think, Mulema, thank you very much. And thank you everybody for being on the call today. And, really what we want to just talk about, like Mulema said, is crisis leadership in action. How do we manage events through moments of crisis and uncertainty? As one who's been in the industry managing events for many years, now close to 2 decades, but I think even more, especially as one who's been in this space, leading a platform that is building an ecosystem for mice on the continent, some of these conversations we have sound like theory. They really do sound like good to have. They sound like good policy statements or, structural good to haves that would, enable the industry to grow until you find yourself right in the heart of it. So Mulema, I'm going to pull back the conversation a little bit to mid-February. And I think mid-February, the world was operating, normal, although we no longer know what normal looks like. And in the middle of February, my company was responsible for hosting in Nairobi, for the first time on African soil, the Global Tourism Resilience Conference that brought together a number of ministers of tourism from across Africa and out of Africa. And that conference came up with what was called the Nairobi Declaration. That was the outcome of that 2-3-day conference. It was the Nairobi Declaration on Resilience in Tourism. And when you think through the word resilience, and again, we try and make sure that every major conference, every major business event that we organize, especially for international dialogues, that they have a sort of outcome or output that will be meaningful, that can drive policy forward. And for that particular one, we had this Nairobi Declaration that talked about resilience. And what we did not know is that in exactly 14 days, we would be tested on matters of resilience. And that's where we find ourselves in. So as soon as we, wrapped up that conference, actually barely wrapped it up, I left Nairobi and was part of a very exciting mice show in the southern part of Africa, Africa's Eden, and proceeded to meet in South Africa, and then again, moved on through Dubai, from Johannesburg to Bali, Indonesia. And my company was responsible for an incentive group that was going to be down southeast for a number of days, and would wind up in a recognition event, or what we call a distributors award ceremony. And transitioning from Johannesburg to Dubai, of course, that's a long flight. And just thinking how weary, how fatigued I had been, the layover of 2.5 hours in Dubai, and then again a very long stretch to Bali. And by the time I got to Bali, and got on my phone, the world seemed to have shifted while I was on air. And got to Bali, and suddenly, there was, closure, or, suddenly there was a level of unease around where did you land? And, and I'm wondering what's the big issue here? And I had a colleague who was traveling at the same time, but via Doha, and was traveling to come to the event, and, was carrying a lot of event material. And I don't know whether it's fortunate or, unfortunately, the rest of our clients, the entire group, had arrived ahead of us. So the entire group was already in Bali, of course, with return tickets booked via the Middle East. And so when I landed in Bali, my immediate concern was whether my colleague had actually made it onto her flight, and, just waiting it out to make sure, that she's landed and has settled. Whereas my immediate focus ought to have been the event that was going to be, of course, the activities over the next few days, and the event that was ahead of us. Remember, this is a destination, because when you do destination events, there's a lot of dynamics. You're working with a venue that's not in your hood, and vendors and partners and suppliers who you've only met virtually, like we're doing right now. So there's a lot of groundwork that you have to cover when you now get on site. And that ought to have been our immediate focus. But at the back of my mind, there was this question, this world nowadays, things evolve very fast. We can have a great time here in Bali, which we're going to do, but how are we going to get out of here? Just that ticking sort of, there's a checklist at the mind of individuals who do what we do. You always have this checklist at the back of your mind. You have a plan A, and then you have B, C, and D, and E, and F. And, so scenario mapping started that night for me. Starting to really think through what are the routes, what if. And, that moment, Mulemo, I don't think there's anything that prepares you for crisis. There are certain elements of crisis that you have to live through and be able to immediately, pull into action these things that you have developed as contingency plans.
Maybe just before you proceed, maybe just to put it in perspective, how many people did you have and from which destinations? So that it gives us your problem, the load that you were carrying. Because if you're in Bali, you've arrived and now you're already thinking of how we're going back. So you're not thinking you and your team. You're obviously thinking of everybody else. Where did they come from? How am I getting them back? Because now the liability is on your client, that if they need to have extended stay, if they need to, reroute, the cost of rerouting. So just to give us an idea, and maybe you can pick it up from there.
Yeah, great. So we had over 50, a group of over 50 distributors. These are senior level executives These are business owners, CEOs of their own organizations that partner with my client within the distribution channels. And all of them are coming from Kenya. So this was a group, and we've done, similar incentives for them, different destinations, and it is a group that, the combined net worth is significant, I would say. The combined concern, it's a significant, yeah. So all in total, the entire group, I think 56 in total.
Okay, that is a good number, and 56 lives that you're responsible for. But for somebody that is just starting out in the industry, or somebody that doesn't fully understand what an incentive group is, so incentive travel is a mode of, it's really a business incentive tool, a performance tool that is used by businesses to incentivize, like in this case where Kezi had a group of distributors that feed from this mother company. Sometimes it's really internal salespeople, internal staff. So when you get an invitation, it means the costs are covered by, in this case, Kezi's client. So it means that the liability for anything, the cost of the travel, even before the crisis, are all covered by the client as a thank you, or as, you did so well this year, this is why you're on this trip. So I think that's pretty much the gist of an incentive trip. Now, in this case, we're looking at, you have 56 different travelers that you need to figure out. So you are awake in your own space, and with the same headspace, need to now start planning the event. How long was the event for? And did you actually have a party? Like, what was the mood around the activity?
So typically, in an incentive group like this one, you will have excursions, a lot of activities, touring the destination, just getting very familiar with, the different, tourist sites. And then we would typically close with an award ceremony, recognizing the performance of the company itself, my client, and then of the individual distributors that are in the chain. And that typically would be the highlight of these few days together. So in total, you'd have them out there for 5 days, then you close with, this beautiful gala, really exotic, where we go out all the way. And then they would typically check out the night after that gala. Except that in this case, we couldn't, because now the thinking became, what do we do? And of course, just to answer your question, did we have a party? You could immediately tell the concern and the burden in, each of the participants, each of the attendees, the concern around whether, how long is this going to last? What are the options? Shall we really get home? Will it be okay tomorrow? So there is this unspoken burden in the room. And as much as an event coordinator, you want to assure everybody that, everything is in control. We are working on this. We are working it out. You can still read the mood and, weigh in on the burden of everyone. And like I said, these are business leaders. These are captains of industry, and they have their lives planned out. So every minute out of schedule, out of, calendar is a concern. It's a cost to them. Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've understood that this was no longer, something that could happen. It was no longer, a hypothetical or theoretic situation. This happened. We had Africans that were stuck in the Far East. And maybe, Kezi, you may consider now starting a class, because I think having watched you manage and get back everybody home safe, I think there is now an opportunity for us to bring this conversation back home, back to Africa, where we're looking at why must Africa prepare proactively? Because I think this is the second time in about 5 years, in less than a decade, that we've experienced such major shockers. So we need to now start thinking, but what are we thinking about? What are we actually, what are we looking at in terms of preparedness when it comes to crisis leadership? When you're in the moment, I think it's actually not something that you are cautiously saying, I am a crisis leader. We're actually in a, problem solving. We are being reactive to the environment that we find ourselves in, So even mapping the course of action sometimes, especially in your situation, I think looking at a situation that would have disrupted the flight plans or the safety of your delegates was not something that you could foresee. Maybe you can plan about, if there was a situation in Bali, how do we exit? But where the crisis was so far away but affected you, I think this is the right time for us to start thinking as Africa. What would your angle be, Kezi, if you were to speak from a preparedness point of view on behalf of, from our sector's point of view? What should we be preparing for? We've had a health crisis. We've now experienced what a war does. I mean, the war in Ukraine did happen, but it was not this significant. It was not a significant disruptor to our industry. But this particular war has really come guns blazing for us, literally.
Yeah. We've and I don't know whether resilience is it's almost that we're becoming accustomed to crisis. So building resilience in that sense, becoming accustomed to crisis, but not necessarily preparing to remain effective in moments of crisis. One of the most concerning things, that when we've talked about it over and over again, is of course air connectivity for the continent. And looking at our experience in Bali then, and the challenges around getting individuals back to the continent without, having to go through the Middle East. You now have to do your intelligence monitoring and, try and think through what is operational. And I remember there was a particular group where we took a risk and put them on Saudi Arabia, and they were flying over Saudi, and, we were doing certain projections and, crossing our fingers and thinking, this is the holy month of Ramadan, nobody's going to bomb Mecca. And, because of the flight options, the options were narrowing and the cost was escalating. And then, we have options through, so I'll take you through what that looks like. You either would have to go down, use Southeast of Asia, get groups to Bangkok or get to Mumbai, which is what we did, or fly to Europe, go to Frankfurt, and that was, already option. But then again, you start have to think visas. Who in this group has, can I get into Europe and then out of Europe into the continent? So just doing those calculations and seeing how narrow your options are. And there was only Ethiopian Airlines, that, could navigate some of those routes. I think begins to tell us as a continent that there is an opportunity but it requires concerted, deliberate effort, from, policy investors. It requires a very deliberate effort to figure out our air connectivity. The other thing is around the skill level, particularly for those in business events and MICE. Just beginning to realize that our work is not only, planning events. There is elements within crisis that are beyond your capacity to plan an event. It was, just looking at the human layered element when it comes to crisis. How do you manage people and the emotions of people? There was also the ability to synthesize information. Where do you get real-time information in moments like that? And of course, there is the challenge right now with a lot of fakes online. Just there's a lot of unreliable and not so credible sources of information. How do you, as a coordinator at that point, identify authentic, real sources of information? How do you run a centralized crisis communication command center in a moment like that? Because making sure that there is available, authentic information will help to calm everybody down and probably give you room to think clearly. When everybody is calm, your client is calm. Just that. So there's another layer of skill that when I look at the continent and how we are training, and even whether we are training, and that's why we figured that conversations like this about crisis leadership in action would be necessary, because it wasn't just I having to figure out how do I lead in that context. It was also my client figuring out how do you make decisions, in moments like that. What matters most? And that was a question, people or profit? Because net, my client had to spend an additional about 12 million. I just had a call with him this morning and, asking are the books balancing? They're still not balancing, losing 12 million in Kenyan shillings in terms of extended hotel stays, in terms of getting, alternative tickets out of Bali to get the team back. That ability to make quick decisions, and not just quick decisions, but informed decisions. There's also the element of scenario planning, and I began by talking about that we map scenarios, but we don't always get real-time pockets of crisis where you test some of the theories that you have, practical opportunities, there are lab opportunities in the industry. But just I think to your question, how are we preparing? I'm not sure we are preparing at all. We're becoming accustomed to crisis in the sense that, and there is a way you can become hardened to hardship, yet you're not necessarily preparing or building the necessary structures to thrive in moments of hardship. I think in a nutshell, Mulema, what I see is, and I hope we don't get there, another missed opportunity for the continent, because I think in the past 5 years, whereas we've done a lot to build competitiveness as a destination, and I'm not certain that we are figuring out the element of air connectivity. We are building larger airports, yes, in some parts of the continent. I'm not sure we are sorting out the ability to travel with ease on the continent, the cost of travel. And from a capacity building perspective, I don't think we are training our people for the challenges that are yet to come, because I don't think we've seen anything yet.
The Christian in me wants to, just pull out a crucifix and say, this should be the worst of it. In just recapping, I think kudos to you. I think we now have a practical example from how we're moving, the practical difference between crisis management and crisis leadership. I think there's evidence of decision making under pressure, and also the fact that you had a decision maker on site, you know, where decisions were made in real time. I think that helps. When we look at what happened with the crisis, because the travel, because this was literally a few days before ITB being the one of the biggest calendar events for the leisure tourism market that happens in Berlin. That was literally at the beginning of that event. So what that did was there was a lot of delegate cancellations, travel. I was scheduled to travel a week later, and I really, because I could trusting that I will go and be safe to come back was something that I was not going to take a gamble with, and so I canceled a trip that was 10 days late into the action. But it is now that issue where we need to start looking at intra-Africa travel and participation from our delegates in a different light. Because the safety of delegates, this was what happened with COVID, where there was, trust became a commodity of, am I going to, trusting that if I sit next to Kezi, she is not going to infect me. If I travel on a plane, if I go to this destination, I'll still be able to go back home. There'll be no lockdown. So now we're dealing with a new dynamic of things. And I think from an events and a MICE perspective, we need to now bring it home to our industry. And like you said, Kezi, it's frightening that we are not worrying and preparing for the things that we should in our industry. When you look at the crises that are going to come to us, it will not be every time that it's, a war or a health crisis. Sometimes it is something at domestic level. What would be what would be the information that you give to anybody that's watching this or that is on the call now? What would you say to them as what should we start doing differently? Because I've had a situation where at local level we got a health scare. It wasn't the levels of COVID, but it was concerning for international delegates. It's like, oh, you've got an Ebola epidemic or you've got a cholera. These are things that we do have in Africa. It's going to be an election year this year, and you've got a few, pockets of incidences, and those then help your delegates make decisions. What would be, if you were standing in a classroom today, for people would you be? For me, that is something that we can use this platform for, because it's a lunch and learn. I don't know how you're sending my lunch over to Lusaka, but I think there is an opportunity to teach and learn something. But yeah, from your end.
There's something very critical, Mulemwa, you said, and if that would be what we all take away today, I think that would be enough lunch. That trust is now a commodity. And it's not just for our industry, but really for every business. It's become an issue of trust. You could not go to ITB because you were not able to trust that you'll be able to get back, safely on time without, an added layer of cost. How we communicate as businesses, how our industry communicates, in order to build trust. So being able to communicate with clarity, being able to prioritize people also over profit. There's the human-centered or the human-layered component in this crisis. That and a good example a good example is Dubai and how Dubai has handled itself in this crisis. And we cover that extensively in one of the episodes in our podcast in this series, Leadership in Crisis, that for Dubai, they immediately, without being prompted, began to issue visas on site for those that were in transit and could not travel. So extending their visas, providing accommodation, ensuring that hotels got communication from the ministry that extend the bed nights, for those that are not able to travel, and, the government would cater for those costs. So that element of being proactive in communication reassures the traveler that we got you and we got this. Number two is, building trust through clarity, providing clarity that, this is the situation, these are the options, and, this is some of even the feedback that we are getting from industry leaders. I was just speaking to the CEO of IMEX, and you know that in a few weeks, we'll be heading to Frankfurt, Germany for IMEX. And the whole, hullabaloo in the market, do we still go? Do we plan to go? Do we plan to, exhibit in the show? And being able to provide options to participants that, we know that you are booked to come in for this, you're coming from this part of the world. If you feel that you're not able to, to come, there is an option. You can utilize your ticket, to bring in a group from a different part of the world, say in Europe, where they are able to connect. So providing those options and ensuring that your buyers feel that you're journeying together is going to help us retain trust. And like I said, it's not just in our line of work, but really across all sectors. That now, one of the things that we buy from each other is the element of trust. And if I can buy trust from you, then I can trade with you. So one of the things I think as a continent we need to do, and this is what has been really, it's mind-boggling for me. Who takes responsibility for leadership and for communication in moments of crisis? If a destination is going into crisis, who takes responsibility to communicate even to those that are traveling? For example, like you've said, many African countries are in the election cycle. This year, next year, this year for Zambia, this next year for Kenya, and many other countries. Who takes responsibility to communicate for the industry and project safety or sell trust to travelers so that we can keep our numbers coming in? Because you know that when international news outlets take responsibility to communicate, if communication is only coming from international news outlets, then we know that, that the way that situation will be projected could be exaggerated, or it could be blown out of proportion. But we internally within our structures, is it our ministries of tourism? Is it our tourism boards? Is it our associations? That's something we need to figure out, because communication is essential in moments of crisis.
Thank you so much. As we're running out of time, maybe we have a few people on the call that would like to maybe share some insights. Have you yourself been in a crisis that you were on the job training, so you found yourself in a situation where you had to figure things out? Please just raise your hand and we should be able to, technology allowing, be able to get you into the chat. Okay. All right. No, I don't see any questions from my end. Yes. So if you have a question, please just raise your hand and somebody will unmute you from the admin end. But having said that, I think we are on a path that is a starting point. So we don't have, maybe it's our innocence that has been robbed, because we have not experienced, whether it is the pandemic, our generation, we know about civil wars in different parts of the world. World War III is not something that we anticipated this far into civilization. So where we sit, rumors of wars and wars are everywhere. And the numbers within Africa still justify for us to focus from within, because we can become self-reliant as a continent if we built the imagine this, we had flights, we've had companies coming out of the Middle East to pick us up, to take us to the Middle East and bring us back this way, or come and cross over our, fly over to take us to other destinations. The connectivity issues that we face, this is an opportunity to start having a plan that does not make us this vulnerable. We should be able to, if we're looking at the meetings industry within Africa, we should not even have conversations. If the Middle East is on fire, it should not affect us because we're self-reliant. Unfortunately, we are far from that conversation. But the lessons that we're going to carry are going to look like, this is the story that we went in and, we went in and had to spend an extra X million shillings or dollars or whatever, because we were not in control of our routes, because it was a third party. We are collateral damage in situations. When it was the medical crisis, we didn't have mechanism, and kudos to the medical industry, because if you look at the health sector now, Africa at the Center for Diseases Control, I think at Africa level, established a response system that is, literally the book on crisis leadership. And maybe it's time for the business tourism overall, the meetings industry, maybe let's pick a leaf from what the health sector did. And I think there is a lot of lessons to be learned from there. So maybe if we look at it from the point of view of getting through to our teams, how would you look at, what would be the steps that you would take as a business owner, as an industry owner, to, because in this case you were on site with confidence, can you say that if you were not in Bali and your team leader was a team member of yours, would they have been able to pull a Kezi? Have you done enough for your teams to have been able to manage not just the information, but even to get the client to be okay to send people to fly over Saudi? Like, that is genius, but I don't know that I would have trusted to use that route. But yeah, for me, I think it is, as we sit as business leaders, what capacities are we actually sitting on before we even look at it from an industry perspective? With a straight face, are you confident your team would have managed that without you?
What I see is work to be done. Work to be done in terms of preparing our teams for crisis. I think there's a lot of organizational internal capacity building that needs to be done. Because you see, I keep saying that the benefit of experience is that you are able to predict. You can make certain predictions with accuracy or near accuracy. That's what experience gives you. And I think it's up to us to start imagining future crises and training our people on how to handle any set of crisis. I certainly think that we have to get into the place where we are manufacturing crisis for purposes of training. And I say that in the sense of try and imagine what could go wrong and build capacity for that. And the rate at which the world is evolving, I mean, it would range anything from health to safety, security to anything, including an economic shutdown where you cannot transact. It could be, it just could be anything. But this is to tell you that we see now opportunities to train, to build capacity, and as an ecosystem, we're doing everything we can, from the podcast series, from internal trainings, to even now in the coming months just launching our MICE Academy, talking about different conversations. But there is an urgent opportunity to train. But apart from that, Mulemwa, I see an opportunity for us to grow the African market with intentionality. We have the opportunity that we've spoken about over and over again, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, and the opportunity that gives us. I see an opportunity for intra-Africa MICE roadshows that help us begin to work the African market. I see opportunity for deeper collaboration amongst African associations so that we can generate intra-Africa business. Beyond investing in building infrastructure, whether it is our air connectivity, whatever other infrastructure we need to build, there is need to do business development within the continent and to increase the volume of trade with one another from a MICE perspective. I believe, and like I began immediately to plan next year's incentives for that group, and it's definitely going to be in the south of Africa. Definitely, I'm not taking those people outside the continent, and it's given me an opportunity to now build, new connections in new destinations, to curate new packages, think through, Africa relationships that did not exist before. I think that we need to mine deeper the continent for business, and this goes to those in hotels, those that are doing the business events, the travel agents. We need to figure out how to increase the volume of business within the continent.
Oh my God, I did not notice the time. I am being a very bad moderator. So everybody on the call, you are giving me an extra 2 minutes each. By 20 of you, we have another 40 minutes to go. So given that we have promised to keep this under an hour, and I think we are doing fine on time. However, we do have to do some selling now. Now, here is the selling point. The Africa MICE Summit is a platform that was created as a dialogue platform. A dialogue platform that, as conveners, felt did not exist because we are the industry on which everybody else is built. We are the foundation that holds everybody. It does not matter whether it is medicine, it is education, it is energy. We are the ones that put the building blocks. When you're building a house, you have the foundation, you have to dig deep, do everything. That is where your concept notes, the nights are built, everything that goes into the planning, into, the spaces that we put in, the time that we put in planning for these events. We are, we're like the back office. Nobody knows our value until they need us. Until something goes wrong, the event manager is actually never known. They even forget to celebrate you. But the Africa MICE Summit was designed to be a platform that takes the events industry to more than people that put up a show or people that, it was a key economic sector whose value is often unnoticed, whose impact on people, on businesses, on communities, on economies cannot be denied. And so the Africa MICE Summit has been for the last 7 years now, been a platform that has grown year on year. And now we're looking to become that leading voice, not for Zambia, not for Kenya, but for the continent. So as we close this session, I just want to sign off and just say thank you so much for everybody that jumped on this call, everybody that's going to be watching and, wants to be a part of the conversation. This is the space that has been created for us. Let us not stop the momentum. Let us not end here. I think this is just the beginning. The conversation doesn't end today. The conversation has just begun. And again, a big thank you to all the leaders in the industry that are agreeing to do the sessions on crisis leadership. This is experience-based learning. So it's going to take a bit more effort on our end to be intentional about what we want to do, about where we want to see our industry go. So please, it doesn't matter whether you're starting now, you've been in the industry for the last 20 years, even just having, I just want to end this message in, I will share this picture eventually, at the summit. There is a picture of me with, I think she was under 2 years, at the central bank with the governor because my nanny didn't show up. And her older sister was, I think, about 10 at the time. My older daughter was about 10. I had a major crisis and a major event at the central bank, and I took my kids to work. So I made them work behind the chairs, but that is how I was able to manage the crisis. It hadn't happened. I had no plan B. There was no plan C. I couldn't cancel because this was on behalf of a client. But every time I look at that image, it still haunts me today how I took children into the central bank on a regular working day. But that is my crisis story. And I look forward to seeing you next month on the last Wednesday of the month. Kezi, it's over to Nairobi.
Yes, we are very excited. We'll be hosting the Africa Mice Summit here in Nairobi from the 9th to the 11th of September. And maybe as we wind up, I could just, take you through quickly what the opportunity is. We're looking at the business event sector on the continent emerging as a platform for trade and investment. It is a connector for global markets, a driver for tourism infrastructure, and it's an engine for knowledge exchange. And what we do at the Africa Mice Summit is really to highlight the importance of the business event sector. We've spoken about these things, the capacity of the business event sector to attract investments, to promote trade and exports, to showcase innovation, and to connect policymakers and industry. And that really is what the Africa Mice Summit does. When we look at where the continent is, and we've had a bit of these conversations around, is this crisis an opportunity for the continent of Africa? We think that it actually does present an unprecedented window of opportunity for the mice sector on the continent. We see the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement now entering its implementation stage. So it's not just a framework which is in construction, but it's actually now moving to implementation with African countries beginning to increase volumes of trade amongst ourselves. We're also seeing expanding aviation connectivity, and this is something that we need to converse even more around. Development of new routes and the growth of, Pan-African carriers, even though we're also seeing some shrinking, but there is an opportunity for us to converse around aviation connectivity. And then convention center investments, there is such a wave of construction, from Kigali. We've seen what's going on in Addis Ababa with the, not just the new airport, but also the, convention center, and then, of course, Nairobi. And there's the rising startup and innovation ecosystem. If you have studied some of the patterns, migration patterns, we're actually starting to see a lot of investment, moving to the continent of Africa. And that in itself opens up new opportunities for business events and for MICE. In Kenya here, we have the ongoing construction of the UN Conference Center, and that presents a new opportunity for us. So the Africa MICE Summit becomes that opportunity that gathers the entire continent, those that are concerned or dedicated to the business events sector. So we bring the entire spectrum of stakeholders, from governments to investors, the tourism boards, airlines and hospitality players, event organizers, your tech innovators. All this gather in one ecosystem at the Africa MICE Summit. And what we try to do through this summit is to position Africa as a globally competitive destination for business events. That is what the ecosystem we're building exists to do. Simply to build an interconnected ecosystem that accelerates trade, investment, and innovation. And that is what is unique about the Africa MICE Summit. Away from other similar events, we are focused on enabling the business event sector to accelerate trade, investment, and innovation on the continent. So this event what it does is catalyzes the ability of African destinations to grow their MICE sectors. So what do we have planned for this year's summit? We have the high-level policy forum, which has become now almost a staple within the program for the Africa MICE Summit. And this is a ministerial high-level dialogue on how do we enable MICE environments on the continent to thrive. And then this year, for the first time, we have an infrastructure and investment roundtable. Last year, we had a MICE investment roundtable. This year, we'll be featuring the infrastructure and investment roundtable, which is connecting capital with opportunity on the continent of Africa. Then we have the B2B networking sessions, the Tech Innovation Showcase, and the highly celebrated Africa MICE Awards. So you can visit the Africa MICE Summit website to be able to see these different features in this year's program, including the Women in MICE segment, which will be happening for the first time in this year's summit. We expect the entire ecosystem to be present within the audience with a market reach of 500 plus industry leaders, 20 countries represented. We already have media partners who are coming on board to engage with us. So we want to encourage every one of you on this call, partner with us. What does your partnership help us do? It helps us engage Africa's decision makers on these issues that we are constantly talking about. It helps us position brands like yours as an industry leader. This summit opens up new markets through the connections that happen at the summit, and it becomes a showcase of new innovations for the MICE industry. So we welcome you to partner with us. Once more, you can go to www.africamicesummit.org. You can connect with us, you can partner with us, and most importantly, we want to encourage you to go ahead and register your participation. So feel free to reach out to us, and we welcome you to join us every last Wednesday of the month on the Lunch and Learn series. Besides that, on the chat, we do have a WhatsApp channel that you can join. We provide regular updates on MICE news on the continent and outside of the continent, and that is to keep us all connected and informed. So thank you very, very much for being on the call. Thank you, Mulemwa, for being with us on the call. We apologize for going a little bit over our 1 hour window. We will endeavor to keep it right there. Please engage with us on our different platforms, ask questions. I know we didn't have a lot of engagement, but we'll be looking forward to keep the conversation going. Thank you, everybody, and have a good afternoon, Africa.